Howdy everyone, it's been a little while since our last video and we wanted to take a little bit of time to give an update on the state of tanks entering patch 10.0.7. This will be the final patch of the tier, and this patch is when the push really begins in Mythic Plus if you're looking for that Thundering Hero title, or if you're just looking to wrap up Season 1 with as high of a Mythic Plus rating as possible. Be sure to keep an eye on the channel, because as more of the 10.1 content goes live on the PTR, we'll be testing and keeping you up to date on all things tank related. So let's hop into it. Over the past several months, the most popular tank in Mythic Plus overall has been Protection Warrior. When you look at all keys done, they make up around 28% of all the unique tanks. But if you look at just the plus 25 and higher keys being done, they make up over 40% of the unique tanks doing keys. There are a couple of reasons that this is the case. First, warriors provide fantastic damage, particularly single target damage. In keys, particularly high keys in settings like MDI, DPS classes are often brought because they can do fantastic AoE damage, particularly on large pools. Having a tank like Blood DK in Season 3 and 4 of Shadowlands, or Warrior in Season 1 of Dragonflight that brings strong single target damage can be really helpful for pushing down bosses, particularly on tough tyrannical keys. Additionally, both Spell Reflect and Spell Block can trivialize or eliminate major mechanics that are serious hurdles for other tanks. Additionally, warriors can bring tons of mob control with an AoE stun, AoE fear, AoE silence, and 2 single target stuns. Warriors can therefore provide stops and kicks for a large number of dangerous mobs and packs. I personally really enjoy Warrior's playstyle. I find the balance of maintaining shield block, ignore pain, and your tier setup while trying to do as much damage and mob control as possible enjoyable. I've been somewhat surprised, however, with the number of people I have suggested Warrior to who just don't enjoy the spec. Biggest issue people seem to have with Warrior is that it is a very different playstyle from most of the other tanks right now. Players used to playing other tanks are used to having several tools in their kit to quickly recover from large damage spikes. Whether it's Deathstrike, Word of Glory, or Feldev, many tanks are used to the thought process of Tank Buster comes in, it hurts badly, and I heal it back quickly. Warrior handles damage intake significantly different than those other tanks. Playing Warrior is all about mitigating the damage from those attacks as they come in so that your health bar doesn't move. Warrior has very few tools to help themselves recover if they fail to mitigate the hits and their health dips low. This means that when Warriors played well, their health bars rarely move and they are incredibly tanky. If they aren't played well, with their defensives used proactively at the right times, they are left feeling like they don't have the tools to manage their own survivability. This playstyle heavily rewards tank knowledge of incoming damage styles and types and can be particularly punishing for new players learning to tank. Going into 10.0.7, Warriors will continue to be very strong tanks and will be among the tanks pushing the highest keys.
Vengeance Demon Hunter looks to be the new jack of all traits but master of none. In popularity, it's dropped to the 4th ranked tank in both Mythic Raid and Mythic Plus. In damage in both AoE and single target, it's ranked 4th. Their durability falls in the lower half as well in Mythic Plus. I'm less down on their durability in Raid because you only spend a part of the time tanking, so the ability to spread out meta, Feldev, and Fiery Brand as defensive makes you very tanky against a single mob for a long period of time. And as for Mythic Plus, Sigil of Silence is still a very strong ability, combined with Chaos Nova, and they have a decent amount of AoE lockdown, and are still good at handling magic damage. But let's compare that to other tanks that are in the meta right now, as well as tanks that have received recent buffs in 10.0.5, as well as Paladin, which is getting reworked 10.0.7. Monk received recent buffs to their magic stagger. Paralyze is really a better version of Imprison because it works on more types of mobs. And Leg Sweep is a good substitute for Chaos Nova. Warriors are still able to negate a lot of abilities in most dungeons with Spell Block and Spell Reflect, and are basically immune to physical damage. They have multiple AoE interrupts and AoE silences. Paladins have Spell Block, as well as unlimited interrupts including... Paladins have Spell Block, as well as unlimited interrupts, including Divine Toll, which can compete with Sigil of Silence. And Death Knights have AMS, Insane Shields, and Death Strike doesn't really care if you take magic or physical damage, it still heals for a ton. Demon Hunters do, however, still handle magic damage better than Druids, but Blizzard keeps reworking Druids and kind of buffing them to the point where they do more damage than any other tank right now. Combine this with the fact that Havoc is still really good in high keys, and Vengeance is really both underpowered and underrepresented right now. As for the playstyle, things remain the same. Frailty is a huge part of your offensive and defensive power outside of meta, giving you a 4% DR and 4% increased damage done, and causing your damage to heal for 8% per stack, which leads into that drain tanking style. It feels clunky to play at low haste levels, but becomes more smooth with gear and higher haste. You can maintain higher stacks of frailty. Demonic is still the go-to talent in the class tree, which you use Fel Dev to enter meta and is good defensive in between your actual meta cooldowns. But with no changes in 10.0.7 and Blizzard already releasing information about 10.1 and people getting excited about that, it's likely that Vengeance Demon Hunter is going to finish the season as one of the lower tier tanks.
Blood DK has been on an interesting arc this tier. They didn't start off as one of the most popular tanks in Raid or Mythic Plus. However, as more and more guilds have started progressing into the final bosses of the Vault of the Incarnates, the strength of Blood DK on the final bosses has increased their overall representation among tanks being played at a high level. For those unfamiliar with these bosses on Mythic, Anti-Magic Shield can be used on each of the last two bosses to immune mechanics that drastically reduces the amount of damage going out on not just the tank, but the entire raid. Even after nerfs to both bosses, this is extremely nice to have for guilds in progression. Additionally, Death's Advance can be used extremely effectively on several difficult bosses in the raid, including to help significantly with boss positioning in Phase 1 of Mythic Razagath. These are actually the reasons I've personally been playing mostly Blood over the last month or so. Because many top players have well-geared Blood DKs, that has certainly contributed to their popularity among tanks in High Mythic Plus. Items obtained from the raid, like Storm Eater's Boon and Manic Grief Torch, can go a long way in covering up Blood's biggest weakness in Mythic Plus, their unfortunately low AoE and single-target DPS. A Mythic Storm Eater's Boon, for example, regularly accounts for between 12 to 15% of my overall damage on DK and keys. My favorite things about DK and Mythic Plus is their almost unparalleled mob control and their ability to be pretty much entirely self-sufficient with their survivability. Having multiple grips as well as A-Bomb's Limb is incredibly useful in several dungeons, especially with how many abilities are no longer recast after a mob is displaced. A perfect example is the early portion of Ruby Life Pools where Flash Frost Earthshapers cast Tectonic Slam, which does a ton of AoE damage. These can be particularly difficult to stop as nearby mobs sometimes cast ice shields that make them immune to stuns and disorients. DKs can stop all of these casts, even in large groups, through a combination of grips, stuns, and disorients because grips are not affected by the shield. DK continues to be a class that is not particularly friendly to new tank players. They remain the tank most likely to get one shot if not played perfectly, and a lot of their damage and survivability relies on near perfect balancing of their health, runes, runic power, and bone shield stacks, while also maximizing uptime of several buffs and being in your own death and decay. These combine to a complex playstyle that is difficult to master, but is extremely fun and rewarding once you do. If Blood DK is the class that has benefited the most from being relevant in the Mythic raid, Paladin is on the other end of that spectrum. Paladin has a fantastic toolkit for Mythic Plus at the moment, but the fight design of some of the last bosses of the raid, in particular Mythic Razagath, were particularly punishing for them. Paladin, for example, has to devote their long cooldown immunities to surviving pushbacks in Phase 1 that a Blood DK can ignore simply by pressing Death's Advance. As the season has progressed, however, and the gear gap between the tanks being played in Mythic Raid and those not being played there has shrunk, Paladin has emerged as one of the top tanks in Mythic Plus. Their toolkit provides excellent party utility in form of interrupts, stuns, immunities, off-healing, etc., as well as lots of defensives to juggle and always have something available. The reduced holy power generation in the kit compared to previous iterations takes some getting used to, particularly when it comes to their off-healing, but the strength of the spec as a whole is undeniable. Heading into 10.0.7, Paladin is seeing the largest changes of any of the tanks. If you're interested in a more in-depth discussion about some of those changes, I recommend checking out an interview between Marcellin and Paladin theory crafter Lincoln that I'll link down in the description, but I'll go ahead and summarize some of the major changes here. Changes to the class tree that were largely aimed at Retribution Paladin mean significant changes for protection as well. One large change is the addition of a new talent, Sanctified Plates. This easy-to-reach 1-point talent increases armor by 20% and stamina by 10%, while reducing damage taken from AoE abilities by 10%. As of yet, there hasn't been any corresponding aura changes to balance this out, so it would simply be a massive survivability buff to the spec as a whole. Additionally, Of Dusk and Dawn has been reworked to be completely passive. This will remove some of the friction that could arise in the spec while trying to maintain both buffs active and also maintain Shield of the Righteous uptime. Seal of Might has been moved and been buffed to also provide 4% strength. Divine Toll and its capstone have moved to the class tree, while Sanctified Wrath has been moved to the Prot Spec tree. Additional connections have been added to both trees, which dramatically improve the pathing options and bring some talents into viability that were previously too expensive to reach. Talking more about the changes to the spec tree, Faith in the Light has been buffed significantly and moved up a tier to make it much more accessible. The talent now provides 30% block for 5 seconds after using a Word of Glory. This would essentially mean reaching nearly 100% block during this period. Sanctuary has likewise been moved up a tier, meaning that the passive 5% DR from it is also easier to take. Lower in the tree, the Capstone Inmost Light was added, which can increase the damage of your Eye of Tier by 300% and also reduce its cooldown by 25%. Also, several other nodes have changed locations within their tiers that overall combine to provide a ton more flexibility and build options. Hard to look at these changes as anything other than a significant buff to one of the best performing classes in Mythic Plus. The Builder Spender playstyle lacks a ton of depth and decision making and may not be for everyone, but purely from a power standpoint, Protection Paladin is looking to be in a fantastic place going into 10.0.7.
Brewmaster Monk is by far the least popular tank in Season 1 currently, making up only 8% of the tanking population when looking at tanks that have completed keys at any level. When looking at higher keys, however, Monk does overtake Guardian Druid, and despite its lack of popularity, it is a fairly strong tank spec. Out of the top 20 ranked tanks that are mostly warriors and paladins, the third highest ranked spec is Brewmaster. It has good low defensive cooldowns and dampen harm and diffuse magic, low cooldown strong heals in the form of healing spheres and expel harm. Leg sweep, paralyze, and ring of peace provide good mob control, but it isn't quite S tier like paladin, interrupts, and warrior AoE silence and stuns. Going into Dragonflight, Monk was seen as the glass cannon, doing insane AoE damage but being very squishy, especially against magic damage. In 10.0.5, changes bolstered their defensives by increasing magic stagger and buffing their self-healing with more healing spheres and a new talent, Spirit of the Ox. Blizzard did nerf the overtuned talent Resonant Fist and gave compensating buffs to their mage damage abilities. As for where the spec sits now, it has above average damage, average to above average survivability, and above average utility, and it synergizes really well with the two most popular healers, Evoker and Druid, in higher keys. The fact that they were low-rated tank coming into the expansion on pretty much all tier lists, combined with the fact that Windwalker has been historically strong in Mythic Plus, the Brewmaster spec just doesn't see the amount of play as other tanks. It's a strong tank now, but won't be really popular unless it's considered an OP tank in the meta.
Guardian Druid is in an interesting place right now. While they are played by 14% of the tank population overall, they make up only 2% of the unique tanks that are being used at key levels of plus 25 and higher. Having said that, they're actually one of the highest DPS tanks at the moment in both single target and AoE. Warcraft Logs currently has them as the highest overall damage for the raid, and Druids have the highest tank parses on both the Soul Pure single target fight in Taros and the sustained 4-target cleave fight on Council. This is in large thanks to the emergence of a playstyle revolving around the new talent Thorns of Iron. Added to the Spectre in 10.0.5, Thorns of Iron does a burst of AoE damage based on your armor every time you use Iron Fur. Taking this talent and putting points into Layered Mane and a Reinforced Fur for more armor, then slamming as many stacks as possible of Iron Fur throughout a dungeon can result in some incredibly high damage numbers. While effective at pumping out those high numbers, however, the playstyle and talent build left a little bit to be desired. You were required to dump 4 points into talents you wouldn't otherwise take in order to get good damage, and then you were left using Rage on Iron Fur even when you didn't really need the added armor. This talent is seeing a significant nerf in patch 10.0.7 that will likely relegate it to being a late tier talent that never sees play. I think that Thorns of Iron meme builds and Bear's generally low popularity kept a lot of players from seeing how good the 10.0.5 changes were for Bear. There are now viable builds that are arcane damage focused or physical damage focused with or without Incarn depending on player preference. And After the Wildfire remains an undervalued ability for the amount of off healing it can provide in certain scenarios. The one thing that the recent changes didn't address, however, is Bear's ability to survive magic attacks. At a glance, Survival Instincts, Bark Skin, and Frenzied Rejuve seem like they should be able to allow Bear to take and recover from most magic damage hits fairly well, but in reality, those tools pale in comparison to things like AMS, Diffuse Magic, or Spell Reflect. Bears are still viable, but pair better with a healer that can provide an external DR to cover them for some of those heavier magic hits. The addition of a 1 to 2 minute magic DR cooldown could really round out Bear's kit, but even without it, Bear's in a far better place than most people give it credit for heading into 10.0.7. That's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.